bird comes and just takes a little bit of the water. He says, what is my knowledge and your knowledge and the knowledge of those who came before us and those that will come that after us compared to the knowledge of Allah? Then the way that this bird just took a little bit of water from this big river. In other words, it's nothing. Our knowledge is at zero in reality when you put it over the infinite knowledge of Allah Ta'ala. Anyone?
You had mentioned before the act of not thinking about something. Like how can a person not think of anything?
So it actually really is. There's this thing that one of the Hakim that I was learning from that spoke about. It's called the Alexander technique. It's like an actual technique, and for calming down the nervous system, it actually is really helpful. And you actually have to try to, in this technique, to not let your mind drift to think about things. Right? So really, it's more like calming down your system, and then what you're supposed to do is to focus on being in your body, right? And that there's ways that they teach you to kind of do that and to be aware of yourself and so forth. But what it is about just not letting your thoughts drift. Okay, now, for us is that you could just, instead of doing that, if you don't want to try to stop thought, just try to just repeat La ilaha illallah or Subhanallah or Allah, Allah, hakada. And be in a state of dhikr, because that you accomplish something even greater by remembering Allah Ta'ala. But the point of trying to tame your thoughts and just breathe, one of the ways that you can do it is by focusing on your breathing. Right? You actually focus on deep breaths, and it actually is a really helpful technique to, at the end of the day, to just take 10 breaths, 5 in, 5 out. Super relaxing. Actually very good for you. And just imagine that everything in your body is just like settling. And that you actually try to stop moving or thinking or doing anything that would ignite your nervous system. It's actually a helpful technique to use. And something like that is permissible. Anyhow, here what we're talking about is objects of reflection. So what does he then say? فِي مَخْلُقَاتِ اللَّهِ, in the things that Allah Ta'ala has created. وَفَنَاءِ الدُّنْيَا. So that's one category, the things Allah created. The other category is the fana' dunya, the true nature of this world. When we think about the true nature of this world, it's a very important object of reflection. Because once we come to understand the true nature of this world, how many people have attained the things that so many people want to attain, and then what happens? And what do we see that happen to people that chase the dunya? And things that seem to be going so good for such and such a person or such and such a company, and then 5 years later, 10 years later, there's a whole different side that we see. Someone that was good in practicing, all of a sudden, that got in with the wrong people, and then what happens to them after that? Just sign after sign and lesson after lesson. With people that we know, family members, friends, that people around us, some didn't make it, passed away, got caught up to that extent. That others have that very serious problems, and on and on and on. This is the nature of the world. So when you come to know the true nature of the world, you have less, or you should have less desire for it. Yeah. And those that after they do everything that is that they do to get it, when they finally get it, when they realize what they had to do to get it, they actually really don't want it. Which is the really strange thing. And I'm not usually the guy that mentions like a movie reference, because I never was really too much of a movie goer, especially after becoming Muslim. But I just had a recollection of a movie I watched a long, long time ago. Anyhow, what they said, this individual, after he did everything that he did, I'm going to keep it general, to do what everybody wanted, finally he realized that when someone told him that you got, right, referring to him, and he didn't want it anymore. Right? That's how this world really is. When you actually get there, you realize, like, oh my God. Let alone when it comes to the hereafter. And the more attachments we have to this world, the harder it is for the ruh to come out. Ya Allah. the more agony when the ruh is being pulled out because of all the attachments. Right? And it's like, imagine something like a hook with all different types of things that can get caught on wet cotton. Right? You got to pull this out of the wet cotton. It's just very difficult to get out. As opposed to pulling a hair out of dough. Right? There's hair in dough, comes right out. That's how we want to be. So the fana'dun wa ahwal al-akhirah, and then the terrors of the hereafter and everything that happens, ya latif, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and then in the final abode of hell. Wasa'ir umurihima, and everything that relates to the next world. Wa taqsir an-nas wa tahdhibiha, so that refining the soul and everything is that we need to do. Wa hamliha al-istiqama, learning about the traits of the righteous and forcing ourselves to be like them. Learning about the traits of the impious and avoiding that at all costs. So then he talks about the verses. قال الله تعالى إنما أعيذكم بواحدة أن تقوموا لله مثنى وفرادى ثم تتفكروا.
Allah Azza wa Jalla says, I give you only one advice, that you stand up for Allah's sake in pairs and individually and then reflect. Surah Saba, ayah 46.
So here, it just points to ثم تتفكروا. تفكر. قال تعالى إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار.
Allah Azza wa Jalla says, surely in the creation of the heavens and earth and in the alteration of night and day are signs for those who have intelligence. They remember Allah standing, sitting, and lying down, and reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth. They say, O our Sustainer, you have not created this in vain. We proclaim your purity from all defects. Surah Ali Imran.
Allahu Akbar. So this was a sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ to recite this verse, and that till the end of Surah Ali Imran. And he would do this when he would awaken, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So soon he'd awake, he would say one of the du'as among Nabiyin, Alhamdulillah, alladhi ahyana, ba'dama amatana wa ilayhi nushur. All praise be to the one who brought me to life after having caused me to die, because sleep is the brother of death, and unto him is the resurrection. So just as we sleep and we wake up, one day we will sleep, i.e. die, and then wake up to the reality of the affairs of the hereafter. And so this is the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ. He also would use the siwak, and then he would look up into the sky and he would recite these blessed verses. And that in it we find that إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. So here in the creation of in the creation of the heavens and the earth, in the alternation of the night and day, are signs for who? لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. And here we would just roughly translate it as the people of intellect. And really, these are the people of innermost core that can go deep in their reflections. And who are they? الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهِ. They are those who remember Allah. And here it mentions three different states. قِيَامًا, standing, وَقَعُودًا, sitting, وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ, and lying down. Yani in all of the different states. Whether they're sitting, whether they are standing, whether they are lying down, in all the different states, they're remembering Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Now here there's a mention of dhikr before fikr. This is why the very best fikr is fikr that comes after the light of dhikr. So dhikr, you know where. It brings light to your heart. So if you want to have munawwar fikr, is that you have to first do dhikr. You have to first remember Allah Ta'ala. And then وَيَتَّفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And they reflect upon the creation of the heavens and earth. The people that do that, when they reflect upon the creation of the heavens and earth, because they're people of remembrance, what happens to them? They come to the right conclusion because there's light in their heart that expels the darkness of kufr and disbelief, and that sheds that from the nafs, that its evil aspects. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. You did not create this in vain. In other words, you created this in truth. You created this with purpose. Everything has a meaning. Subhanaka, glory be to you. فَقِينَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Protect us, Ya Rab, from the fire. And this is the type of people that we want to be. So just imagine people that drinking alcohol, taking mind-altering drugs, that don't even have belief, aren't in a state of wudu, and they're in a state of greater ritual impurity, and just doing whatever it is that they want to do in this world, oftentimes many of those things being haram. And then these people come together in their meetings and they start to plan and think about how it is that they can, whatever, whether they have a political agenda or whether they are part of some company or whether they're writing a book and they work in academia or whatever. What's going to come from someone like that or a group of people like that? Even if it is seemingly beneficial on the surface, in reality, that it will be tainted. Now, the fact that a believer can take from something that someone else produces and appropriate it and use it for a good purpose, that's something else. But many of those things in of themselves are dhulmani. They're dark. There's a difference between fikr that's nurani and fikr that's dhulmani. And some people, wa'adhu billah, reach the point where some of the main plots that shaitan himself wants to spread on earth, they receive it directly from him, wa'adhu billah. And others receive it from his main, in the hierarchy of shayateen, from his main people that are working with him. Right? And this is where you have shayateen of the ins and the jinn. You have shayateen in the unseen realm, and then you have shayateen in the human realm. That, in other words, it's almost as if they're possessed because they simply are there to execute the plot of shaitan. Is that they receive it, some of them actually directly from shaitan, others through some of his main people, others through some of his minions. And people are different. But the main shayateen of the ins, a'udhu billah, receive it directly from shaitan. And that's why what they do is so damaging and so destructive. And that some of these people will collapse, for instance, an economy of an entire country. And think about the bloodshed that is on their hands. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. That for all human beings, but especially believers. This is why is that anyone were everybody on earth to come together to spill the blood of a single Muslim, Allah Ta'ala would throw them all into the hellfire. Wala yubali. So what about the amount of bloodshed that's happening in the Muslim world? Where people are claiming that they want this or that, but the reality behind it, there's agendas and there's things that they let happen. And innocent people die day in and day out. Oh, that Allah Ta'ala that will grant people respite, but He never neglects things. People will see what's going to happen. You're not going to want to be someone like that on Yawm al-Qiyamah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And we want them to repent and to make tawbah. And subhanallah, la ilaha illallah. But if they don't, it's going to be intense. Yani, adab la yutaq. No one can bear the punishment that Allah Ta'ala would give to these types of people. So there's degrees to which people could harm and so forth and so on. But what we want is to have fikr, and that's the whole point of going to that tangent, that's nurani. And if we want to do things that are a benefit to people, we want people that to move from a state of suffering to a state of that healing, a state of sadness to a state of happiness. We want to uplift people, all people. Even if people don't accept Islam, we want people to live okay. We want them to have their basic needs. This is a part of being a Muslim. We want people to have enough food, drink, the basic needs that they need, safety and security and clothing and shelter and so forth, and to be able to thrive. That we want people to live well. And that we hope that in the process they also accept this deen. This is what we want to be, sources of good in the world, as opposed to sources of evil. Maghaliq lil-shar. Mafatih lil-khair, maghaliq lil-shar. Keys that open the doors of good and locks that shut the doors of evil. And then in Surah Al-Ghashiyah that we recite, and it's sunnah to recite that every Jummah. Surah Al-A'la and Surah Al-Ghashiyah. أَفَلَا يَنظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ وإلى السماء كيف رفعت وإلى الجبال كيف نصبت وإلى الأرض كيف سطحت فذكر إنما أنت مذكر.
Allah Azza wa Jalla says, do they not look at the camels and see how they are created, and at the sky and how it is raised, and at the mountains how they are firmly placed, and at the earth how it is spread out? So, O Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, keep on giving advice for you, or only an advisor. Surah Al-Ghashiyah.
So these are all, the first is just a general encouragement to reflect. These other two clusters of verses are about things that Allah has created in this world. And then in Surah Muhammad, أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيَنْظُرُوا.
Allah Azza wa Jalla says, have they not traveled in the lands and seen?
ومن الحديث السابق رقم 66. So let's see what that hadith was. Okay, no, so he mentions it here. الكيس من دان نفسه. Okay, so the intelligent one is the one who takes himself to account. وَالْعَمِلَ بِلِمَا بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ. And works for that which is after death. So that process of dana nafsahu, this is the person who uses their intellect to take themselves to account. This is one of the manifestations of tafakkur, is muhasaba, taking yourself to account. That's one of the great things that we can do, to exercise the use of the intellect to think about what we do during the day. How could I have done things better? To assess, how could I make changes in my life? How can I avoid this thing that I've fallen into, and so forth and so on. وهكذا. خير إن شاء الله. Allah give us tawfiq ya arhamar rahimin. All right, so we're going to read from Al-Maqasid min al-Dalal now. Let Hamza read again, and then you can read from the next book. تفضل.
Chapter 3, the true nature of prophethood. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Chapter 3, the true nature of prophethood and all humankind's need for it. In his most basic substance and original disposition, man was created simple and naive, possessing no information about the realms of God Most High. There are many realms, so many that only God knows their number. As he says, none knows the hosts of your Lord but he. Quran 74:31.
Okay, so this is a chapter on في حقيقة النبوة, the true nature of prophethood. واضطرار كافة الخلق إليها, and he wants to prove how all human beings are in need of prophets. Okay, and so he says when it comes to the human being, in terms of the foundation of our fitrah, we of course are biologically wired to believe in Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, but we enter into this world very simply. We enter into this world dependent. He's going to talk about the various things that develop in the human being very soon. But there's very little that we know. And then we come to learn a little bit more and a little bit more. But he calls here the awalimillah. So Allah is the Rabbil Alameen. He's the Lord of all of the worlds. All of the worlds. What is included in all of the worlds? A lot. A lot. What do we know about it? A tiny, tiny bit. What do we know about the 200 billion galaxies in the known universe? Very little. Right? There's a lot out there. And all of that is not even to the first heaven yet. That's all in the Samad Dunya. Same to the first heaven, same to the second heaven, the third heaven. And what else has Allah created? Allahu A'lam. We don't know that. But we know the Prophet is the best of all of those things that Allah created, all the worlds. Now, تفضل.
Man's information about the realms is attained by means of perception, and every perception was created in order to inform man about a given realm of existence. By realms, I mean classes of existent beings. The first sense created in man is that of touch, by which he may perceive certain qualities in existent things, such as heat and cold, moisture and dryness, softness and roughness, and so on. Touch cannot apprehend colors or sounds at all, which might as well not exist at all so far as touch is concerned.
Okay, so the first thing is limbs. Okay, and that babies, when they're born, immediately there is a connection of touch, right? Before that they're able to see things, before they're able to hear things clearly, right? Is that there's touch, and they attach themselves to the mother, okay?
Next, the sense of sight is created in him, and he is able to perceive colors and shapes, there being the broadest aspect of the realm of the senses. Then he is endowed with hearing.
So broader than what, right? It's broader than hearing, right? Because you can see with your eyes, there's so many different things that you're able to see. So broad in that sense. Okay, and then of course, even on the spectrum of things that can be seen, we can only see a small thing on the spectrum. Then the spectrum of things that can be heard, we can only hear in a small spectrum of things that can be heard. Anyway?
Then he is endowed with hearing, and he is able to hear sounds and pitch. Then the sense of taste is created in him, and so on until he completes his journey through the realm of senses. When he nears the age of 7, the power of discernment is created in him, marking another stage of his development.
Okay, so this is why in fiqh we have what is called the sin tamyiz, the age of discrimination. And they don't tie it to a specific age, but he's saying roughly around, the age of 7, which is of course the age that once a child turns 7, now what are they supposed to do? Now they're supposed to pray. But you teach them to pray. You make prayer beloved to them. And you don't prevent them if they're younger than that. If you're doing the right thing, they'll come at like ages 3 and 4 and, do this and like stand on their head and then leave the prayer or something like that, or, that. But alhamdulillah, they're like starting the process. But age 7, we should slowly and gently make prayer beloved to them. Give them incentive, make it a family affair. If we have a little brother or sister, making, people in the community, this is a really good thing to make a big deal out of this. And then at 10, now it's time to get much more serious. Now there's discipline. If they don't pray, right? To teach them, there's consequences for the things that we do. طيب. But 7 is where the first stages of the aql start to develop, so that now that they have an ability to do certain things that they couldn't do before. This is why that if you have like a mushaf or something, if someone's under the age of the discrimination, you can't have a young child who hasn't reached that age of discrimination bring you a copy of the Quran, right? Because they don't have enough intellect that treat it in the proper manner. Okay?
With it, he is able to perceive things that lie outside the realm of senses and do not exist in it at all. He then ascends to another stage, and intelligence is created in him, giving him the ability to perceive necessities, possibilities, impossibilities, and other things that are not to be found in the previous stages.
Okay, so the 5 senses, the vastest of them is sight. Okay, and then with the microscope and the telescope, we can see things. With other ways of detecting things in the modern world now, that we can see things that we weren't able to see in previous times. But the sight is much faster than all of the other 4 senses. But then in relation to the senses, the intellect is significantly greater than the realm of the 5 senses. Because think about what you're able to comprehend with the intellect. Because the language of physics is mathematics, essentially. Think about what you're able to know that exists through the intellect in the world and through that various types of discovery, the things that you're able to think about in your mind. It's amazing how vast the intellect is. It's significantly vaster than any of the 5 senses. طيب?
Beyond intelligence, there is another stage wherein another eye is opened, an eye that perceives the unseen, future events, and other things to which the intellect is blind. Just as the power of discernment is blind to the objects of intelligence, and just as the power of sense is blind to the objects of discernment, if the objects of intelligence were presented to a child in the stage of discernment...
So what is he talking about here? The eye of the heart. The eye of the heart, when that opens, is that world is significantly more vast than the world of the intellect. The things that you're able to see with the eye of the heart. And the wonders of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in the unseen. Just think about what our Prophet saw, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Laylat Isra Mi'raj. Allahu Akbar. Right? What is everything we could potentially know in the seen realm compared to that the smallest bit of what our Prophet saw on Laylat Isra Mi'raj. And then what was unveiled to him throughout the course of his life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the great awliya and the salihin also that receive some of this. Absolute knowledge of the unseen is for Allah. But Allah Ta'ala gives whatever He wants to give from knowledge of the unseen to whom He wants to give it to. Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Now, so what he's saying now is that just as the person who's mumayyaz, but they're 7 years old, and their intellect has started to develop. It's not like someone who's like 15 years old. It's not like someone who's like 40 years old in terms of what it is that they know. And just as they don't know that, likewise, even the most intelligent of people that have reached the higher degrees of intellect, that they're like that child in relation to them, in relation to the one who has this knowledge of unveiling. This is why it's been said, the scholar is a hujjah. He's a proof upon the common folk. Why? One of knowledge. Because are they acting in accordance with knowledge? But then the awliya are a proof upon the scholars. Because are the scholars acting in the correct way based upon their knowledge? And so meaning here by awliya, that people that have a connection with Allah Ta'ala and receive knowledge that come from His presence, even though there's degrees of awliya in relation to this. Right?
If the objects of intelligence were presented to a child in the stage of discernment, the child would reject and dismiss them. And in the same way, some intelligent people reject and dismiss the perceptions of prophethood. That is sheer ignorance, for they have no basis for doing so. It is simply a stage they have not reached, so that to them it might as well not exist. And so they conclude that in fact it does not exist at all. If a blind man did not know by sheer quantity of hearsay that colors and shapes existed, and then the concept were suggested to him out of nowhere, he would not understand it or have any way of approaching it. God Most High.
Someone's spiritually blind, and they themselves have decided that I'm never going to believe. And if that's what you've decided, then what do you expect is going to happen, Annie? As opposed to being open. Like, what do you expect is going to happen? Right? You've made up your mind. I'm not going to believe anything unless it's scientifically proven. Tayyib, that's your problem. Right? You're the one who chose to believe that everything just has to be scientifically proven. How does that stand logically that there can't be something that science can't explain? Right? Science is very narrow in terms of what it can explain. There's a lot of things science can't explain. It's beyond the realm of science. Aywa?
God Most High has provided His creatures with a way of approaching the concept of prophethood by giving them something analogous to it, namely dreams. In dreams, one may perceive something of the unseen future, whether directly or in the guise of a symbol that can be interpreted. Imagine that a person had never experienced this, and then someone told him that there are people who fall unconscious as though dead and lose touch with their senses, and then perceive the unseen. He would reject this and argue for its impossibility, saying, perception occurs by means of the senses. If a person cannot perceive things when those senses are present and active, how could they possibly perceive them when they are inactive? This is a form of analogy that is disproven by lived experience. So just as intelligence is one of the stages of human development, wherein man is endowed with an eye that perceives different kinds of intelligible things of which the senses are unaware, prophethood too is another stage with its own eye, an eye endowed with light, allowing to perceive the unseen and other things that intelligence cannot apprehend. People doubt prophethood in three ways. Some doubt that it is possible at all.
So what is he trying to say here? Is that we know that according to hadith that dreams are one of 46 parts of prophecy. Okay? And it's a window into that world. And dreams are, it's a mistake to think that dreams are insignificant, and it's a mistake to think that dreams are everything. And sometimes people base their whole life on dreams, or they become depressed because of a dream that they saw. Yani, balance is really what we want in these things, right? And if someone sees a bad dream, you simply wake up and say, A'udhu billahi min shaitanir rajim, on your left side, and you don't tell anyone about it, you never think about it again. Khalas, you move on. Just because you saw a dream doesn't mean it's going to happen. Right? It's actually a very bad sign to be haunted by your dreams and to dwell on them. Bad dreams, and you move on completely and forget about them. Right? And then the Prophet told us that we'd be protected that if we do that. But dreams are important because of this meaning of being exposed to things that we might not normally be exposed to. And of course, this is the higher forms of dreams, because dreams can be of a demonic nature, or they can be of an egotistical nature, or an angelic nature, or one of the combinations of those three. But the more angelic they are, is that we might see something that then actually does happen. We might receive a glad tidings in the dream. We might experience something beautiful in a dream. And we might be given knowledge of something in a dream that we were not aware of. So this is a window. And the whole point is that when someone's dreaming, where are they seeing what it is that they're seeing? What space is it existing in? Right? But Allah is creating the ability to see. We even called the word for dream is ru'ya, right? Which is the word for seeing. Ra'a yar'a is to see. And what do we say? I saw a dream. You saw it fain. With your eyes? Fain. Where did you see that dream? Allah, that I was just reading a meaning that Sheikh Ibn Hajar mentioned about this, is that a dream is essentially Allah Ta'ala creating the ability for us to see. That when we are sleeping, and even though you're not even conscious, you're sleeping, but you're seeing something. And similarly, the one who created that ability to see while we're dreaming could also create that ability for you to see while you are awake. So a prophet used to be able to see behind him as he would see before him, without having eyes, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if Allah Ta'ala wanted us to be able to see with our knees or with our hands, we would see. Tabarak wa Ta'ala, He can create whatever He wants. So that understanding helps us understand this idea of spiritual experiences. And so what he's saying here is that there's something beyond the intellect, and that this revelation is that something that he likens it here, that with it as a type of internal eye that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that opens up for the individual. So read that last paragraph there. هذا نوع قياس.
People doubt prophethood in three ways.
No, the paragraph before that. Reread it.
So just as intelligence is one of the stages of human development wherein man is endowed with an eye that perceives different kinds of intelligible things of which the senses are unaware, prophethood too is another stage with its own eye, an eye endowed with light, allowing it to perceive the unseen and other things that intelligence cannot apprehend.
Allahu Akbar. No. Keep going.
People doubt prophethood in three ways. Some doubt that it is possible at all. Others allow that it is possible, but doubt that it had actually occurred. Others still doubt that it has been granted to a given individual. The proof that prophethood is possible and that it has actually occurred is that there exist in the world certain objects of knowledge that there could not conceivably be acquired by means of reason alone, such as medicine and astronomy. When looking into them, one inevitably realizes that they could not have been apprehended without divine inspiration and grace from God Most High. Experiment alone would not be sufficient, for there are astronomical phenomena that occur only once every 1,000 years. How could they be arrived at by experiment? The same is true of the properties of medicine. This proves that it must be possible for there to be a way to perceive these things that the intelligence cannot perceive. That is what is meant by prophethood. This is not to say that prophethood is this and this alone, but rather that the perception of such things that lie outside the purview of intelligence is one of the special properties of prophethood. It has many other special properties besides this, which is but a drop in its ocean. The reason I mention it here is that you yourself have something analogous to it, namely the things you perceive in dreams, and you also possess knowledge of its kind, such as medicine and astronomy. These are the miracles of the prophets. May peace and blessings be upon them all. And there is no way to attain them by recourse to intelligence alone. The other special properties of...
So that would need to be looked at in a little bit more detail, but if you think about that, that people that like inventors, and that oftentimes is described as kind of like a flash of light. In other words, is that where does that knowledge come from? Reflecting upon something, from focusing on something, where does that come from? An insight that you have that this might work, that there's nothing outwardly that's actually giving you that insight, right? That's something that you're just gifted, and this is what he means. Like, and he's just using this as an example, where much of the good, well, it's not always good, but much of what comes to human beings for ideas that they have in various ways. And again, sometimes it's nurani, and other times it's dhulmani. Sometimes it's of light, and other times it's of darkness. But it doesn't necessarily come from the thing itself that focusing their things, that their intellect on. It comes from outside of that, and that's his point here. Anyone?
The other special properties of prophethood may only be perceived by experimental taste, by traveling the Sufi path. You only understand this much because you have something analogous to it, namely dreaming, and but for that you would not believe in it at all. If it were reserved for the prophets alone, and you had no analogy for it to allow you to understand it, how could you believe in it? Belief can only come after understanding. This analogy is attained with the first steps of the Sufi path, through the achievement of a certain kind of experiential tasting, which is commensurate with what one attains, along with a certain kind of belief in what one does not manage to attain, based on analogy. This special property alone is therefore sufficient basis for faith in prophethood. Beyond that, if you should doubt the prophetic status of a given individual,
And this is really important, right? Because this element is that even if someone hasn't experienced this, by connecting to the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that have, as we mentioned before, this is the next greatest state to be in. And that you can attain a high degree of even the lower degree of faith through that connection. But this again points to the importance of the awliya, connecting to the awliya, believing in the awliya, spending time with the true inheritors of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yani, there is nothing that the world in its entirety needs more than awliya of Allah and scholars who've put their knowledge into practice in true people that can teach us how to live according to the way of the prophets. And being around them and seeing what happens that on their hands and that what it is that we learn from, nothing is more important to the rectification of the entire world and everyone and everything in it than that. And this is what we unfortunately have to spend most of our time convincing people that it is that we actually need. Were people only to realize that, they would be changes in the way that they approach things. And once there's a change in the way that people approach things, then everything else will follow. In terms of what they do in of their own selves, what they do with their own children, where it is that they choose to invest their resources, and so forth and so on. And this is what we hope to see in these lands, where that, seminary studies are not just that fringe thing that people do. Or that worse yet, people actually view people that spend time in a seminary like, oh, they don't have anything else to do. Like, a'udhu billah, inshallah, kalam fadhi hada. And this is toxic thinking. This is the reason why we're in the situation we're in as ummah worldwide. It's because of these types of ways of thinking. And just imagine what would come from that if there was so much more energy and so much more resources. And you have that hundreds or in the thousands of trained people and the contributions that they would be able to make in the realm of science, in the realm of psychology, in the realm of imagine that if there was a rebirth, what the contributions that people would be able to make in every field. It would be amazing. But we have to start somewhere, and hopefully that more and more people will take this seriously.
Beyond that, if you should doubt the prophetic status of a given individual, there is no way to arrive at certainty without gaining knowledge of that person's character, whether by first-hand observation or by sheer volume of hearsay. If you are familiar with medicine or jurisprudence, you are able to become familiar with jurists and physicians by studying their character and hearing their words, even if you do not actually meet them in person. You are not incapable of recognizing that Ash-Shafi'i was a jurist and that Galen was a physician, and your recognition is factual, not mere conformity to the opinion of another. By simply learning something of jurisprudence and medicine and then reading books and works about them, you will arrive at necessary knowledge of their character. Likewise, if you understand the meaning of prophethood and then assiduously study the Quran and traditions, you will acquire the necessary knowledge that the Prophet ﷺ stands at the very summit of prophethood. You may then bolster this by testing the things he said about worship and how it assists in the purification of the heart, and how he ﷺ spoke the truth when he said, when someone acts upon what he knows, God bequeaths him knowledge of that which he knows not. Or when he said, when someone assists a tyrant, God unleashes the tyrant against him. Or when he said, when someone rises in the morning with but one single concern, God Most High will see to all his concerns in life and the next.
And this is one of the greatest ways to strengthen in certitude of this, right? So he's talking about three different things here. One, about the different types of doubt that people have in Prophet. One is about the possibility of it existing. He says the possibility there is the fact that it exists. Once you prove that it exists, you know that it's obviously possible if it exists. Then about its actual existence. And what there is, he's trying to prove that just as the intellect can know things that the senses don't have access to, likewise, it's possible for there to be something, and of course we believe this is truth, that there be something beyond the intellect can know that which the intellect cannot know. So that at least having someone recognize this is within the realm of possibility. Now when we speak of Nubuwwah as a rational possibility, I heard one of the teachers say this. Anyone that denies the rational possibility of prophethood, you can't really have a conversation with that person. Because what is your proof to prove that it's not a possibility? There's no proof that they can provide for that. They have to at least be fair. Now, they very well might be a kafir and say, I don't believe in it. That's between them and their Lord. But to say that it's not a rational possibility, you can't really have a conversation with someone like that because they're not thinking straight. At that point, it's better to focus on something else and affect them in a different way. And then what he says is that as for that someone in particular that receiving that revelation, here, this is where you have to learn about the Prophet ﷺ. So do you see how important the Prophet ﷺ is? Because the more that people experience the Prophet ﷺ through us, the more that they're going to come to understand that the Rasul is the best of creation. And this is why we have an enormous responsibility upon our shoulders. And no one's ever going to fully be like him, so we also talk about him. But we have to recognize one of the greatest things that postpones the da'wah is the Muslims themselves. And if we were right, there would be a lot more people coming to this faith based upon how we reflect the prophetic light. But when you learn about him, and you learn about his story, you learn about his teachings, you see the impact it has upon you. Just ask anyone who wasn't Muslim and takes the Shahada what happens internally, right? What happens internally that when you accept this deen. Just ask someone who wasn't really practicing and comes back to the deen, what happens internally. And then putting into practice his teachings. If you do this, this is what happens. It works. You see the impacts of it on your heart. Anyone? Let's just finish this section.
When you experience the truth of this thousands of times over, you will arrive at necessary knowledge that brooks no doubt. That is the way to attain certainty about prophethood, not by such miracles as the transformation of a staff into a serpent or the cleaving of the moon. If you were to witness those feats in a void without all the countless other things that provide them with context, you might take them to be sorcery or illusion, or think God wrought them to send you astray. After all, God leads astray whom he wills, and he guides whom he wills. Thus, the question of miracles will be thrown back at you. If your faith is founded upon a rational argument for miracles, it will be destroyed by a counter-argument demonstrating the problematic evidentiary value of miracles. Supernatural feats ought to be in but one among many types of proofs and contexts that together form a holistic position, so that you attain necessary knowledge.
Al-Maqasid as a first-class scholar of the science of Kalam. He's saying that it's not that miracles are important. Don't get him wrong. What he's saying is that you want to also have a rational argument along with your belief in that miracle. Okay?
So that you attain necessary knowledge for which you cannot name only a single specific basis. It is akin to how when a man receives information from a large group of people, he cannot say that his certainty regarding the information is derived from any one specific member of that group. The source of his certainty is unknown to him, for it does not come from outside that group, nor from any specific member of it. This is the nature of strong knowledge-based faith. Experiential tasting, on the other hand, is like witnessing something in person and holding it in one's hand. It is found only in the Sufi path. That is as much as I need to say now regarding the true nature of prophethood. I shall now explain why it was necessary to speak of it at all.
And then again, is that leads to a higher degree of certitude. Once someone starts to experience these blessed experiences, then they have a higher degree of certitude, and then when you and I are around them, we also benefit as well. SubhanAllah, time's up, 6:30. I'm just going to read like a line or two from this blessed book. Oh wow, this is sufficient. So, Imam Muhammad bin Abdullah bin Shaykh al-Aydu says in his book, إِذَا حَصَرَ عُلُومٍ وَقَرَّبِينَ والله لو تنعه نفعنا بعلوم في الدارين آمين. فإذا نظرت في الأشياء وميزتها وجدت الهوى أصل كل فتنة وبلية على اختلاف أهواله. Ya Allah. That one statement suffices. That's the dars of the week, of the year, of our life. That's just the dars of the day. It's the dars of the week, the dars of the year, and the dars of our life. That's all we need, is to understand that. Yani, This is one of the most important things we can possibly understand. تفضل.
If you examine things and discern them, you will find that base desire is the root of every tribulation, no matter what form it takes.
Look at that. إذا نظرت في الأشياء, if you really think about things and contemplate them, you will find that what وَمَيَّزْتَهَا, and sift through them where things are now clear for you. وَجَدْتَ, you will find that الهوى, so your base desire, your desires are what? أصل كل فتنة, the foundation of every fitna and baliyah, of every tribulation and calamity. على اختلاف أحواله, no matter how many different ways that they manifest. That's a pretty powerful statement that requires a bit of reflection. Is that the hawa is the foundation of every fitna and baliyah. But then it's not important to focus on the heart, you know what I mean? These goofy Sufis, that's all they do is focus on the heart. There's people need to do this and do that. Like, seriously, right? If that statement is true, which it is that you probably should focus on the heart. If it is the asl of every fitna and baliyah in the world, right? You should probably then care for your heart a little bit, understand how this manifests and what is it you need to do about it. So this is pretty serious. And that people that laugh at these types of things, meaning that like think that this is just goofy Sufi stuff, right? This is the foundation of the deen, yani. And I'm really looking forward to the upcoming retreat. This book 21 is one of the most amazing books ever written. It's amazing. And he clearly says unequivocally, understanding how the importance of the heart is the foundation of the religion. Khalas. This is the foundation of the religion. So what if you spend your time just circling around this topic and thinking that's a place that you shouldn't be, and never ever actually end up studying that science or take on that perspective? What happens to people is that they will die committing major sins and not even know it, is what will happen. That's Yahya, potentially. I'm not saying definitively. So it's a very dangerous state to be in. Asl kulli fitna biliyah, Yahya. So we need to know what the hawa is and protect ourselves from it. May Allah Ta'ala protect us and preserve us, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. Give us tawfiq in all our affairs. Wa sallallahu alayhi Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Just recite those lines quickly because I took Sheikh Ozar's class time.
ربنا انفعنا بما علمتنا ربي علمنا الذي ينفعنا ربي فكنا وفك أهلنا وقرابة لنا في ديننا مع أهل الكثر أنت وذكر ربي وفقنا ووفقكم لما ترتدي قولا وفعلا كرما وارزق الكل حلالا دائما وأخلتك يا علماء نحظى بالخير ونكفى كل شر ربنا أصلح لنا كل شؤون وأقر بالرضا منك العيون واقضي عنا ربنا كل الديون قبل أن تأتينا نسا منون واغفر وسر أنت أكرم من ستر وصلاة الله تغشى المصطفى من إلى الحق دعانا والوفاء بكتاب فيه للناس شفاء وعلى الآل الكرام الشرفاء وعلى الصحب المصابح الغرار اللهم اهدنا بهداك واجعلنا ممن يسارع في رضاك ولا تولنا وليا سواك ولا تجعلنا ممن خالف أمرك وعصاك وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم يا ربنا اعترفنا بأننا اقترفنا وأننا أسرفنا على لظى أشرفنا فتب علينا توبة تغسل لكل حوبة واستر لنا العورات وآمن الروعات واغفر لوالدينا ربي والأهل والإخوان وسائر وكل ذي محبة أو جيرة أو صحبة والمسلمين أجمع آمين يا ربي اسمع فضلا وجودا منا لا باكتساب منا بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سولي بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سولي بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سولي صلى وسلم ربي عليه عد الحب وآله وصحبه عداد طش السحب الحمد لله الإلهي في البدء والتناهي حمدا كثيرا دائم مهبة النسائم